come in and have some small group dialogues, maybe even one-on-one for those that still have detailed questions about what's in the code. Dee, does that sound like reason? And so we'll keep you informed. We're kind of waiting to see kind of where we are and make sure we're ready for that, and that we give you enough time to really review it and have your questions. So that's kind of where we are. Now we're gonna pivot again to the preservation guidelines. So we have historic design guidelines that govern the historic district, and we are revisiting those and doing another examination of what those are. And the team from Lordak and Sargent is here. I'm gonna let them tell you maybe a tiny bit about them. They're a fantastic team. They're what I can tell you is we've got two perspectives from the Lordak and Sargent team, an architect and historian. And so when we put those kind of perspectives together, I think we get the best of all possible worlds. I'm really excited to have them as part of our broader team, and they're going to just give us a little overview of where they are, what you can expect, and what we're going to do today. So it's just kind of a kickoff. For those of you that might not know, we're going to do it again on Monday. So if you saw this meeting advertised on Monday, it will be a repeat of what we're doing tonight, and then we'll get into more of the meat of the guidelines themselves. So with that, let me introduce Karen and Marco, and let them take it from here.
So, thank you for having us. I'm Karen Gravel, I'm Director of Historic Preservation. I'm a historian and an architect, and I work in historic preservation. Marco is an urban designer. He's a landscape architect and an architect, and he does a lot of urban planning. So together we're working as a team for your project to look at the historic guidelines. We've introduced ourselves. We'll go through the best practices first, and you already have the historic code that you all probably know fairly well. This is a document that it outlines everything that needs to happen. So most of the pieces and parts are in place. We have the area of review that's essential. We have an outline of what the reviewing body should be, and we have a mechanism for enforcement. But what we're looking at really are the guidelines that help with this enforcement piece. And according to the National Trust for Historic Preservation and other planning entities, there are some basic things that need to be a part of a good guideline. We have divided them into things that clarify what the guidelines are, as well as provide consistency. Thankfully, you have someone who is able to handle visual interpretation of things, that meaning a graphic designer or architect. That is the first piece. We will try to make sure that the language is user-friendly, provide visual aids and diagrams, and help structure a way to educate the public on what Avondale is and why this is important. Part of best practices also involves reevaluating this on a consistent basis and regularly. I'm not sure when these guidelines were actually implemented the first time and if they've been rewritten, but this is a great step in reviewing them again. And then coordinating with other regulations. Y'all been talking about the zoning code, and we want to make sure that whatever our recommendations fold into that as well. Because I think the example of the discussion tonight about the AHUs is terribly important, especially for the historic residential district. So the way I approach and we approach historic landscapes, whether they're cultural landscapes, neighborhoods, or buildings, is understanding the character defining features of the place. And so what we will do is, as you all know, this was a great planned community, the first in the South. It has some distinct features that were essential to the design of the place that we want to really go back to and think about as we move into the guidelines. lot sizes, the street layout, landscape, the placement of trees, the way the buildings are set amongst each other. It's very getting back to the basics of massing scale and size and making sure that Avondale maintains the character that it's always had. We also have to recognize the transportation corridor and what does that mean for the district. The second piece is the architectural styles, and we will help make recommendations as far as the new different materials you're encountering. There's all kinds of new issues that come up with. I'm sorry.
I can't hear you back here.
Oh, you can't hear me. I'm sorry. Well, we'll talk
You can start
louder.
over if you want. So,
Marco's going to talk about the process. So
real quick about I'm sure everybody's getting a little hungry. We've already made you think pretty critically today, so just gonna talk about what we're gonna be doing for the next 5 months. You're gonna be seeing our faces, and effectively, kind of today's like a big kickoff, and you know, starting with kind of reviewing documentation, understanding what the procedure is, what are the kind of the hiccups that are happening right now with the procedure, or what are things that can be improved, or what's something that's missing. That's something that we're gonna be reaching out to you all and kind of talking about in the coming month. And then also looking at precedents, right? Well, other cities have district guidelines. What are the things to learn from? There are some great examples out there, and Seattle's got some good neighborhoods. You know, Charleston has a great way of organizing their historic district guidelines. So just kind of looking at that and seeing what can be applied to the city. In terms of community engagement, we'll be seeing some of you maybe on Monday and saying the same thing, but it'd be great to have you again. But at that point, maybe we'll have a little bit of time to talk, get some feedback, and kind of get into it a little bit. And then next week we'll be releasing an online survey. I don't know when exactly it'll go out, but it'll be next week, and it'll be online for about 2 weeks. There's a series of questions and also an area for anybody to kind of add your input or feedback for whatever is missing, and that'll kind of be the beginning of our initial assessment, along with kind of reviewing the documentation and the issues. That'll be done by about mid-March. Kind of going into phase 2 is when we start identifying what are the improvements that are necessary based on our assessment. You know, what are the areas that need review? One of the big things that we're going to be in charge of is creating graphic outputs that go along with the guidelines. A lot of times, it's a lot of words, and it's hard to really put it all together. We're going to be doing diagrams and having images and just stuff that makes it a lot clearer and easier to understand the process. And once again, going back to that kind of clarity and consistency, everything's going to be geared towards that. And then on March 23rd, we're going to come back to you and have our first kind of open house public workshop talking about our initial findings and recommendations. Then we'll go back. We'll talk on the 23rd. We'll talk about the online survey. We'll talk about what we found. We'll get your feedback then, and then between then and April 21st, we'll be kind of creating the first draft of the guideline updates. And on April 21st, we'll be presenting those. Same process of getting your feedback and talking a little bit more about how to refine them, how to get towards the final process. And then we'll make one more edit. Phase 3 is a little bit more. We kind of got to go back and we got to churn some stuff out. We got to get everything kind of looking pretty good so that it's almost a final draft version, and that'll be posted online between May 6th and 24th for online review and comments. So kind of give everybody time to sit down, read through them if you want, look at the pretty pictures, just tell us what's missing, what's still unclear, and kind of move forward from there. Kind of late May is when we will be finishing that up. And then towards the end of June is when we're supposed to have kind of a final deliverable. We'll provide the city with a final document. We'll present our final recommendations, and that'll be on July 15th, where we'll have a final update of here's what the whole process was, here's what we heard, here are the changes that we made, and here's your final document. And with that, you want to talk? Yeah, sure. So talking about what our initial steps are, really, we're starting to get into this, but what are the physical issues? What are the things that are happening within the historic district that are impacting the meaning of the preservation district? It's the scale, the location, in additions of new construction, infill development, placement, all that kind of stuff. And how is the current historic guideline? How are the parameters setting that up? Right? What is missing? Tear downs. What's the current process of tear downs, what buildings are not being protected, kind of talking about tiers, if you guys are familiar with the current guidelines. Starting to look at, you know, what's being said about windows or other historic material that could be treated, and how do you actually, you know, right now, how do you govern the application of new materials like solar panels, or Trex decking, which is kind of a composite decking system, and you know, how does that work with the existing fabric and what's currently in the guidelines from it. In terms of operational, that's, you know, one of the most important things is you guys already have a good set of guidelines. It's about organization. It's about how is the public perceiving the guidelines, how easy are they, what's the consistency behind it, and so looking at how it's enforced, the clarity in the use of the guidelines. You know, if I was a resident, you know, how easy would it be for me to go through the process, the criteria for rulings, right? When you apply for a permit, it should be clear as to what your work or your changes or rehabilitation or construction is going to be. Sorry, I'm getting a little hungry. It's going to be. What's the criteria? How is it going to be judged, right? And making that clear. How do you handle unforeseen conditions, right? If a wall collapses or things of that nature, and then a clear message on what is historic here. Why was the Avondale Historic District created? What are the parameters, what Karen talked about before, in terms of setbacks and building placement and landscape and
making sure that's clear.
Making sure that's clear as to why that's being presented. So that's in a nutshell what we'll be doing. Try to make that short and sweet. But we're happy to take any questions, comments, thoughts.
Will you make any recommendations about the mid-century district when it's east of the lake? Or just about the historic district?
Currently, our scope is just within the historic district.
Can you repeat the question?
If there would be any recommendations about the mid-century district, or is it just limited to the historic district?
Yeah, our current scope is only within the current historic district. I know you guys have a report that was done in terms of recommendations for expansion beforehand, but that's something that we'll take into account.
Yeah, well, I would encourage you to do that, particularly for those who live there and the things that are happening there. It's very distressing to see sometimes. I think it would be good to get moving on that. So any kind of recommendations would be very much appreciated.
Somebody else had that? Yes, sir.
Maybe this isn't for you to answer, but how long has the historic district been around, and why was it created?
That's a great question.
I was part of the committee that started the first historic district, and at that time, we were concerned about the scale of some of the new building, garages that fronted on the street, things like that, and felt like that was not in keeping with the historic character of Avondale. And so the ordinance that we worked and that was adopted in the early 90s dealt with the district as a whole, not individual. Our decision was that we really didn't have historic buildings that were significant per se. It was the character of the neighborhood, as you mentioned, the streets, the setbacks, the scale, those kinds of things that were really important and that we wanted to implement the ordinance in order to preserve.
Okay, and then will the historic district remain the same size?
That's a great question, and that's what we'll look at as kind of holistically at all of Avondale. We can make recommendations about that, but I don't know that we'll speak specifically to the mid-century modern, but we can make recommendations to, because we're here in 2020, the period of significance and what becomes historic has changed since the guidelines were first made in the 90s. So.
Is this map on the back of this sheet here, the dotted lines, heavy dotted lines, that's the current historical district? Is that what that
Yes.
is?
Yeah. Yeah, if you didn't pick one up there, you can grab one on the way out if you'd like. It's got, and we'll put this on the website as well. And I believe, Shannon, there's within the city website, there's been a specific link created in the historic preservation area for the study, so any updates will be on that.
No.